Boys and girls, we are going to do something different for story time. Now, I know some of you were here when Miss Rebecca started this book, but I don't know if some of you were totally listening when she was reading it. So do you care if I just real quick read through the first couple chapters for a recap, and then we'll pick it back up? Because this is a true story. And some of the kids that I read this to are in college now, and guess what? They still remember this story. Partly because I said his name wrong. I used to call him Adoniram, but his name is Adoniram. And that's a kind of a hard name, but his name is Adoniram Judson, God's man in Burma. And if you look around the top of the book, that is the writing in the place. That's how they write their alphabet. Look at that squiggly line around it. That is how they write their alphabet, where Adoniram is going. So the thing about this book is there's not tons of pictures, but you could sit back, close your eyes, and pretend to like make a little movie in your head. That's what people who love books do. They read the book, they think about it in their head, and they imagine it like a little movie. So, sit back, get cozy, and I'll read you we'll read a couple chapters. I know where Miss Rebecca left off because she left a sticky note. But for the kids that didn't hear it, just let Miss Parnell recap. Deal? Because you might have forgotten about it. It's been a while since we read it. Chapter 1, A Surprise for Father. Goodbye, Father! Adoniram waved his small little arms above his head, and he ran down the dirt path. Father turned in the saddle. If his dad's turning around in a saddle, would you say this is the olden days? Yeah. Father turned around in the saddle to wave farewell to his son. I know you are just 3 years old, Adoniram, he said, smiling, but I'm counting on you to be a good boy and to help your mother. He pressed his heels firmly into the horse's side and cantered off down the lane. I will, Father, Adoniram said. I'll be very good. He stood in the lane until Father was out of sight beyond the elm trees at the end of the path. But he started to cry. He wiped his little hand across his eyes. Then he felt Mama's hand on his shoulder. Come inside, son, Mama said. She held him. She led him up the steps and across the wooden porch. I have the most wonderful idea. Adoniram followed Mama inside the parsonage. Parsonage means that's where a preacher lives if he's the preacher at a church. Adoniram followed Mama inside the parsonage, trying to keep up with her by taking long, big steps. As they passed Father's study, he stopped and peeked in. He looked up at the sturdy wooden bookshelves and the hundreds of books that sat there. A large black book lay open on Father's desk. Next to the book was a small pile of papers. He knew that the large book was the Bible, and that the papers were notes for Father's next sermon. Adoniram wanted to touch the Bible, but he knew it would be wrong. You must never go in my study without permission, Father said. Adoniram suddenly remembered Mama's promise of a wonderful idea. She had gone into the kitchen. Maybe she made a special treat for him. He ran after his Mama to the kitchen. He stood on his little tiptoes to look at the tabletop. There was no sign of cookies or a cake. He scrambled up onto a stool and pulled at Mama's dress. What is it, Mama? He asked. He opened his eyes and smiled. What is the wonderful idea? Is it a treat for me? Mama poured herself a cup of tea and sipped it thoughtfully. She looked down at Adoniram and smiled. No, it's not for you. It's a surprise for your father. But I know you're going to like it very much too. Adoniram winced. You're going to crack up. He remembered that one brought his father a handful of dead bugs. Mama, Father doesn't like surprises. He didn't like the last one I brought to him. He will like this one, Mama said. I promise. He's going to like this one very much. Mama set her teacup down on the table, untied her apron, and took Adoniram's hand. Come with me, son, she said. He was surprised. Mama walked him right into Father's study and sat down in Father's best chair. She took the big Bible from the desk and laid it open on her lap. Then she put her arm out to Adoniram and pulled him close beside her. You're going to learn to read, Adoniram, she said. She ruffled his hair. Don't worry, I'll teach you. You'll be able to read a little bit of God's word to Father when he returns from his trip. Adoniram nestled his head on his mommy's shoulder as he stood beside her. He looked down at the open Bible. There were black marks on white pages, but they meant nothing to him. Could he really learn to read what it said before Father returned? Mama, he said, I'm too little to read. You are small, she said, but you are a very smart boy. Adoniram listened to Mama's lessons. He studied the alphabet. He learned the letters A and B and C. He learned to recognize a few words, but some were harder, and he had to puzzle out the sounds one by one. After a few days, he was able to understand a little bit of the chapter he was studying. Is Father coming home today? He asked. No, son, not today, Mama said. The next day he would read a few more words. Father coming home today? Soon, Mama said. The days passed, and then one day Adoniram ran into the kitchen. The large Bible was under his arm. Mama! He put the book down carefully on the table, though, and looked up at her with shining eyes. Will you listen, please? I can read the whole chapter. Mama rushed over to him. I knew you could do it, she said, and she gave Adoniram a big hug. Just then, the front door slammed shut. Adoniram had not even heard it open. He looked up, gasped in surprise, and jumped off Mama's lap. Daddy, you're home, he said, laughing and jumping. I have the most wonderful, wonderful surprise for you. Adoniram put his little finger on the first word and began to read. He only made a few mistakes. When he had finished, he looked up into his father's face. Father's mouth looked like this, and his eyes looked like this. At first, he said nothing. Then he whispered, You can read. He picked Adoniram up, swung him around in circles, and yelled, You can read! That night, Mama came to tuck Adoniram into bed. He sat up and twinned his arms around her neck. We did it, he said. We surprised Father. Later on, he heard Father and Mama talking to each other in the hall outside his bedroom door. Honey, our son is going to be a great man. A boy his age that can read, he can become anything he wants to be. A doctor, a lawyer, or the President of the United States. Adoniram didn't know what a president was, but he knew that he pleased his father, and that was the very best thing in the world. Chapter 2, Baby Mary. The next morning, Father surprised young Adoniram. Son, you can read any book in my study, said his dad. Adoniram began to read, and read, and read. Father's study was filled with books. Now you got to think, this is the days before iPads and TVs, so the most fun things a kid could do was read. There were books about plants, books about insects, books about oceans and animals and famous people. There were a lot of books about God in the Bible. Adoniram read so much from these books, he decided he was going to become a pastor, like his father. Come over, over here, Johnny, he said to his friends one day. We're having church. It's not Sunday, Johnny said. I want to play ball. But Johnny had to stay and play church. So did many of the other neighborhood children. Adoniram pretended he was the pastor. He stood in the yard. He opened a pretend Bible. Then he tried to preach like his father did every Sunday. Johnny and the other neighborhood kids pretended to listen. I want to play ball, Johnny said. Not until we finish church, Adoniram said. Now everybody stand and sing, go and preach my gospel, saith the Lord. The little children sang the song. As they sang, Adoniram looked over at his house. Mama was sitting down, looking at him on the porch, but she looked different, tired. She rubbed her hand on her stomach. Adoniram thought that was really funny. He'd never seen her do that before. When his song was finished, he waved at her and ran off to play ball with the other children. When he got home that evening from playing ball, Mama was not on the front porch. Father was there. There's a surprise for you inside, son, he said. Come with me. Adoniram followed Father to Mama's room and looked in. Hey, Mama looked a lot better now. He walked up to the bed and looked down. There lay a tiny pink person, wrapped in a blanket. Here's your sister, Adoniram. This is Abigail. This is a surprise? Adoniram said. It's a very pink surprise. The days passed. Abigail began to crawl, then walk. Then she and Adoniram began to play together. They actually became good friends. They liked to run around in the fields and pick flowers and catch bugs. Just don't bring them home to Father, Adoniram told Abigail. After a while, another baby came into the family. This time it was a boy, and his name was Elnathan. That's a funny name, said Adoniram. Adoniram's a funny name too, said Abigail. Yes, but it's also Father's name, Adoniram said. The next baby that came into the family did not have such a funny name because her name was Mary. Now we have a family with 4 children, Adoniram said. When I grow up, I'll be a famous doctor, become very rich, and I'll take care of all of you. I think I'm going to be a doctor, said Elnathan. You can't be a doctor, Adoniram said. You're just a little boy. You're a little boy too, said Elnathan. Yes, but I'm very smart, and Father said I will be a great man. Adoniram, his mother's voice said firmly. Yes, ma'am. Adoniram knew she was going to say. You must be more humble, she said. None of us knows what's going to happen when we grow older. You never know what God might do. Elnathan might become a doctor, and you might be a very poor man. That night as he lay in bed, he wondered, was he or Elnathan going to be the greater man when they grew up? They were all going to grow up, of course. Abigail, Elnathan, Mary. He tried to imagine what they were going to look like when they got old, but he just couldn't do it. But then suddenly Adoniram heard a scream. He sat up straight in bed. His whole body was trembling. Ah! Mama! Adoniram cried. What's happening? He jumped out of bed. He rushed down the hall. Mama was holding on to Father. Her long hair hung around her. Tears were coming down her face. Mary, she whispered. My beautiful Mary, my baby. Adoniram didn't hear the whole story until the next day. But baby Mary had died in the night. For weeks, Mama would not eat. She could not sleep. All she did was sit in her chair and cry. Adoniram picked some wildflowers from the field to give to her. Abigail tried to help too. She would try to sweep the wooden floors of the house, but she was so small she could not sweep everything up. Adoniram and Elnathan worked hard. Little by little, things sort of returned to normal, and one night at dinner, Mama said, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the 3 beautiful children I still have left. She looked around the table at Adoniram, Abigail, and Elnathan, and she smiled. You must all promise me. Promise me you'll stay close and not move too far away when you grow up. I will stay with you always, Mama, Abigail said. No, I'll be a doctor, but I'll stay close, Elnathan said. We will all stay close, Adoniram said. So that's the end of chapter 2. Maybe you remember that, maybe you don't, but in the next story time, we will do chapter 3 and 4 and find out what goes on with Adoniram next. And this is a book that lots of first grade teachers read around the world to their classes. The reason kids love it so much is it's got funny parts, scary parts, sad parts, but all of it is true. This is a true story of a man named Adoniram Judson. So I'll see you for our next story time.